original repertoire of hunting calls, that is, the calls that were actually used during the hunt, were designed to bring order to the activity and communicate information that was crucial to all participants. By simply listening to the calls, a participant can follow the progress of the hunt to determine, for example, whether the animal is lame, whether it is swimming across a pond or leaving one, whether it is on open ground or in the forest, and so on. The calls were initially performed as rhythmic shouts called ue that were similar to Morse code, and later, the calls were performed on the corn. This was usually an animal horn that had been hollowed out, and it could be heard at a much greater distance. Since the instrument is so short, it can only produce 1 or 2 pitches. The calls were mostly distinguished by patterns of long and short notes. Later still, the calls were performed on the trompe de chasse. This is the hoop-shaped predecessor of the modern horn. This instrument allowed for the production of elaborate melodies that were highly valued in the Baroque era. During the golden age of the courtly hunt in the 17th century, there were 31 functional hunting calls. Each call communicated information that was crucial to the progress of the hunt. All participants, even the hounds, had to recognize and respond to the calls immediately, even though the melodies, at least to outsiders, sound remarkably similar. Recognizing each call was part of a huntsman's training, but since the calls are so similar, composers could recall the hunt by imitating the general features. The notes are drawn from their harmonic series and stay within the range of the 4th to the 12th partials. That is, most hunting calls begin with the muscular gesture of the rising 4th, and most favor ascending figures and trochaic rhythms, that is, long, short, long, short, long. To demonstrate how these hunting calls are used in art music, I'll look at one of the authentic calls from the French repertoire. Its quotation by Haydn in his Symphony No. 73, and an imitation by Brahms in the Serenade No. 1. La Vue is one of the oldest calls in the modern repertoire. It was catalogued by André Daniken Philidor between 1686 and 1705, and is preserved in a manuscript in the Bibliothèque de Versailles. La Vue was sounded during the hunt to signal the first positive visual identification of the quarry. Like many of the traditional hunting calls, it begins with the muscular leap of a perfect 4th, it's strongly diatonic, it relies heavily on long, short, long, short, long trochaic rhythms, and it remains within the main melodic range of the horn, from the 6th to the 12th partials. You may have noticed a few unusual features. These horn calls are learned orally rather than through notation, and this has allowed for the preservation of distinct performance practices. The calls are typically notated in 6/8 time, but in practice they have a distinct rhythmic swing that does not really sit in that meter, although it does preserve the trochaic long, short, long feel. Hunting horn players apply what they call the taillot and add a very fast ornamental trill. Tailla, ta-tailla, ta-tailla. The tailloté is considered the soul of hunting horn performance. And finally, the written F, the 11th harmonic, has a distinct tuning that gives the music a characteristic flavor. This pitch would be out of tune in standard systems, but it is very characteristic of the Alp horn and the hunting horn. I'll play a short scale so you can hear that F starting on what's C for the horn. And let me play the first phrase again so you can hear this in practice. The defining features of the authentic hunting calls have been preserved in the traditions of hunting horn and are still used by huntsmen today. But it's difficult to know how much they were preserved in the transition from the hunting field to the concert hall in the 17th and 18th centuries. Haydn quoted this hunting call, La Vue, in the last movement of his Symphony No. 73, La Chasse, which was written in 1782. The final movement originally served as the overture to Haydn's opera, La Fideltà Premiata, from the previous year. Hunting plays a significant role in the plot of the opera, and both the opera and the symphony were written for performance at Esterházy Palace, where hunting was a regular activity. Haydn's patrons were certainly pleased with the reference to a favorite pastime. Haydn preserves the original melody, but otherwise normalizes the unusual features. The movement is notated in 6/8, and it seems likely that this meter was imposed throughout. The hunting call is assigned to the horns, but they're doubled by the oboes, so one assumes that standard articulations were used, and the written F in the horn melody was realized according to standard tuning systems. We can only guess if the horns used a more raucous approach that was appropriate to the hunt, or a refined approach that was more appropriate to the concert hall. Haydn's horn players probably held their bells in the air, so the sound would be a bit brighter and shriller than what we would expect today. The melody, as Haydn might have heard it, probably sounds something like this. Brahms does not quote any hunting calls directly in his Serenade No. 1, but the musical gestures are remarkably similar to La Vue and Haydn's La Chasse. The conventions of the hunting topic were very well defined, and Brahms is simply writing within the expected parameters. Brahms conceived the serenade at Detmold Castle, where his patron, Prince Leopold III of Lippe, was an avid and enthusiastic hunter. The music of the serenade reflects the prince's values and the traditions that were preserved at his court. Brahms was certainly aware of the sounds of the hunt and responded to them in the music. In Brahms's case, the horn players definitely played with their bells lowered and a hand in the bell, although again, they may have played with a raucous tone to emphasize the connection to the hunt. In Brahms's day, this hunting theme would have sounded something like this. These three excerpts demonstrate the consistency of the hunting topic over almost 2 centuries, from an original call written in the late 1600s to a quotation of this call from the 1780s to an imitation of this type of call in the 1850s. We may not recognize the connections among these 3 works today, but they would have been very obvious to Brahms and his listeners. Brahms and his audience were fully aware of the rich traditions of the courtly European hunt and capable of recognizing the music when they heard it in the serenade.